Wish I could put.
Okay, so we are back and we're going to start. We're going to look at chapter 11. Before we start, I'm probably this is going to be a little bit shorter than like last time, the last few classes, but there's a little bit of a caveat. I have a little bit of homework, so to speak. I don't think it would take a long time, but I just thought it was something I found it really interesting and I wanted to pass that along for you guys to give it a try. So for that, you will need a little bit of paper. So if you don't already have something, a few sentences down for yourself, maybe go grab that before we start. But I think you all are probably at least within good distance of a piece of paper and a pen. So just let me know when you're ready and then we'll get started.
I'm ready.
You're ready?
Me too.
Okay. And Myra looks like she's almost ready.
I get my pen. I just dropped it. I'm ready.
Okay. So we are going to start at the end of chapter 10. Let me pull this back up. We're going to read chapter 10, verses 35 to 39, and then we'll look at chapter 11, kind of following that thought from the end of chapter 10. So would someone like to read 35 to 39?
I could go ahead.
Right.
Therefore, do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward, for you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. For yet a little while, and he who is coming will come and not tarry. Now the just shall live by faith, but if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the saving of the soul.
Awesome. So we saw at the end of the last chapter, keeping in mind the original author did not write these in chapters, but we saw at the last chapter we discussed that this confidence gives us reward, and the confidence is tied to endurance, and endurance is tied to faith, and those who hold fast to the faith are going to see a reward for that, and those who shrink away, it's like shy away, shrink away, and I was having trouble saying either of those words. So those who shrink away are not going to receive the reward. So that's kind of the warning at the end of the previous thought. Then we're going to move into chapter 11. Let's just start first with 11 verse 1. Who would like to read that?
I think I can handle that.
Okay.
Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
Okay. So probably thinking it's a little weird. We just read one verse. This is going to tie into the homework. So this author here is giving us two things that faith is. Faith is first, the substance of things hoped for, and second, the evidence of things not seen. And I feel like, I could be wrong, but I feel like we have all heard this verse probably a million times. And I don't know that we've all really thought about what it's saying. Like, what does it mean that faith is the substance or the evidence? What does that mean? And so I was kind of thinking about what do the words mean? And then all throughout the rest of the chapter, I was kind of seeing how each of these things that we're about to read, these stories or accounts from the Old Testament, how they are either substance of their faith or evidence of the things that they couldn't see. Does that make sense, kind of?
Mhm.
So what I wanted you guys to do was to make sure you write down, or at least remember, like the two halves of faith, the substance and the evidence. And then when you go back, we'll do a couple here to start, but I'm not going to do the whole chapter. when you go back and read the chapter, see if you can pick out whether each account was a substance of their faith or an evidence of something that they couldn't see, but was proof of their faith. So that's kind of the homework. It was really fun. I kind of had fun reading through them and thinking about, I wonder what that means. But basically, the substance of the faith is something that they actually did because of the faith, because of the hope that they had. Whereas the evidence is more like something that happened to them or happened in their life that was like a proof to what they already believed or what they had hope in. And there's one side is active, it's something that we do or they did because of what their hope was in God. And the other side is this was like almost like a revelation of their faith. Like this was like a proof that this is something to be relied on. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So then the very next verse, he says, for by it, the elders, by it being faith, by it, the elders obtained a good testimony. And then he goes on to tell us some of the good testimony of our elders in the faith. Let's look at Myra. Would you read verse 3?
I'm sorry, but I have the New American Standard again. By
Okay.
faith, we understand that the whole world has been created by the word of God, so that what is seen has not been made out of things that are visible.
Right. So by my thought process, this would be an evidence of the things unseen. For one, we didn't see God make the world, but also it's like he says, the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. So quite literally, intangible things we couldn't see, but they stand as a proof that God did make the world and God is reliable. There are a lot of times, especially in the New Testament, that the authors will point us to creation as a reason to believe God's faithfulness, whether that's because he had a plan before he created the world, or that's because the world has order to it and we can rely on that order to know what God wants because he puts things plainly. Either way you look at that, it's a proof to us that our faith, our hope has meaning because God made the world. We didn't do it, but it was done and it's a proof to us. Does that line of thinking make sense?
Mhm.
Okay.
It does.
All right. I will read verse 4, which says, by faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it, he being dead still speaks. So this is a substance of Abel's faith because he had hope in, whether it was he had hope in who God was or in his relationship with God, and that relationship was valuable. Whatever his specific hope was, his substance was he offered a good offering. It was the offering that God was happy with and ended up being better than his brother his brother Cain's. And so that was the substance of his faith. His faith was made into his offering that he gave to God. And God calls him, God says testified of his gifts. When we read in the story, he says in so many words, Cain, I don't appreciate your offering as much as I appreciate your brother Abel's. So he speaks well of this substance, this thing that Abel does in his faith, in his hope. Does that make sense? It's God is acknowledging what he is doing, and he's called blessed for it. He is blessed for it. So does that make sense then? Would you be able, we'll maybe do one or two more,
Right.
and I'll let you guys kind of give your thoughts on the next couple, but does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, and it's a
Okay.
good chapter to do it because it's all the way through the rest of the chapters. Is there,
Exactly. Yeah.
this is
So
the
we'll
faith
do,
chapters, so.
exactly, yes. So we'll do like one or two more just so we can, like I said, kind of get practice doing it before you guys do it on your own. But I would like you guys to do the rest of the chapter with that. And we have a couple other sections we can talk about too before we end. But this chapter I felt was really good. Kind of dig in on your own and apply that first verse to the rest of it. Okay. Julie, would you like to read verses 5 and 6?
Sure. By faith, Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death and was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. But without faith, it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him.
Awesome.
So basically, it was saying that Enoch had faith in God and who he was. And it really tells you right in that last part of the verse, or in verse 6, exactly what it is that he had faith in, so that God rewarded him, which is what it said he would do, was that he would reward him. So he had his act, or his substance, was his faith in who God was and what God promised. And I guess then what he did was that he believed that, let's see, he believed that God is, he believed that he was a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So obviously he diligently sought him.
Mhm. Yeah. And
That's pretty much it.
for sure. And I pulled from the first verse that the
And it says, and he had testimony. So it said he had testimony. So he obviously was telling people.
yeah, definitely. And I would consider the first part the evidence because it was done to him because God took him away. He couldn't have done that himself. So I consider that an evidence. But I think this is kind of a both and because that second part does say what did he do? How did his faith prove himself worthy of that act of being taken away? So it's kind of a both example. So awesome, perfect. Let's see. Paula or Myra, would one of you like to do verse 7?
By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world, and because an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith.
Yeah. So do you see either the substance of his faith or the evidence of things not seen?
Well, the evidence of things not seen is definitely there. He prepared an ark not knowing even what rain was.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be, excuse me, that would be the substance of his faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
That he did what God told him to do, even though he didn't understand why he was doing it.
But it's both because he did something
Even though he didn't see it.
Substance, yeah, it would be the substance.
Yeah. I in my notes, I definitely had it as a substance because he actually did something. But you're not wrong, Myra. That there is that it served as a proof because something that he didn't know what it was happened, And because he had been faithful, he saved his whole family through it. So yeah, definitely. I don't think there's a wrong answer. I hadn't
Yeah.
thought of it like that, but you're definitely on the right track for sure.
Mhm.
So we'll read verses 8 through 12, and then we'll read another section after that. And I guess I'll go ahead and read that because I think all three of you guys have read. All right. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. By faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. So those are a couple more examples. And I didn't want to do those together just because each of them have kind of a few different things that they did. But it'll be good for you guys to look at later. All right. Julie, would you read verses 13 through 16?
Okay. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire, but now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them.
Yeah. So this is kind of pointing exactly back to the end of chapter 10, where he's talking about those who are faithful are going to receive the promise, and those who shrink back from their confidence will lose the promise. And so here he's saying all of these people, they died in faith. They died not seeing the culmination of the thing that they hoped for, and yet they stayed faithful to the end. And because of that, they had this hope in this homeland that they couldn't see, this heavenly country, as it says. They had this hope in something that was ahead of them. And because they had the hope in that and they stayed faithful, they received that. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And another thing I wanted to point out, he says in verse 15, truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. So they had the option to lean into the things that they could see and the things that they could tangibly control. They had that option, and they chose to pursue what they couldn't see and what they couldn't fully understand. And so that is part of the faith, is we all have things that we can rely on pretty well that we tangibly can see. We can rely on our country. We can rely on our money. We can rely on our relationships with the people around us. Or we can choose to rely on the things that we have hope in and that can be proven in our lives. We get to choose that. And these examples that we're looking at chose to put all of their eggs in the I can't see this, but I have full faith in it basket. Yeah. Any thoughts or questions on that little section there? And a little bit later, it's going to call back to this section again, which I just read this like 20 minutes ago, And I didn't even realize it until we just read this again. So that's
Mhm.
good reason to read things more than once, right?
There you go.
All right. Let's see. So we'll read verses 17 to 22. Would Myra or Paula like to read that section?
I will. I hear Paula, unless she really wants to.
Go ahead.
By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And the one who received the promises was offering up his only son. It was he to whom it was said, through Isaac your descendants shall be named. He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. By faith, Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshiped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones.
Awesome. So here we even see this faith carrying through generations of one family, which is pretty cool. We see it starting with Abraham, and Abraham has faith to the point of trusting that even if his son actually does die, God is going to bring him back, because he said, this is the son that your lineage is going to be blessed through. So he said, okay, however that's going to happen, I trust you. And he was going to go forward with that, what God told him to do, even though it made no sense. And then obviously Isaac then blesses his children. When it says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come, that to me says he was blessing forward. Like he was blessing things that he did not know were going to happen. It wasn't like when you die and you pass your things on to your kids, you know what is in your estate and you know what you're passing on to them. This was, I'm blessing your children and your children's children, and these good things are going to happen in your family. And that takes faith. I mean, we can't guarantee what's going to happen tomorrow, much less several generations down the road. And so that was his faith. And then Jacob does the same thing. He blesses each of his, the sons of his son, Joseph. And then Joseph does the same thing, blessing the children. It says, when he was dying, he made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions. So he is doing the same thing. He's saying, he's looking back at what has been done, looking at evidence of the faith. And then he's saying, all right, now moving forward, this is what I want you to do. When we go back to the land that was promised to us, you need to take my bones. So that was proof of God is good. He saved us from Israel. Also, I have faith that we're going to get into this promised land, so take my bones with you. That was both of those things. Right?
Right. And God fulfilled his promise. Even though he wasn't going to be able to see the promised land, he knew that God had promised that if they were going to get there. And so he just said, this is what I want done with them.
Exactly. Yeah. He had complete assurance that this was going to happen. And he said, I'm not going to see it. And really, it's interesting to me. And I don't know, maybe I'm just young and naive, but I don't know that we really think about where our bodies are going to be laid to rest in the same way that they did. But for them, that's not the only time I can think that they actually move an ancestor's body to a different place of more meaning after like several years after they've died. And so just kind of something interesting to think about. I could be wrong. Maybe we would care about that. Maybe I'm just young and haven't thought about it, but it
I don't
seems
know. I think that with them, their belief in the resurrection of the dead, the way it was going to happen, they thought it was very important to have everything together at the same time, same place when the resurrection came. So knowing that people got dug up and looted and whatever, they wanted to protect those remains. I think that's why they were so careful with it.
Mhm.
With us, we just know that it's going to happen. He's going to pull all the parts together, I guess.
Yeah. All right, any other thoughts before we read the next section? Paula, would you like to read verses 23 to 29?
Sure. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. How far am I going? Sorry.
29, but I can read the last few.
I think. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned.
Awesome. So this is another section where there's like several different acts of faith, both substance and evidence. It's interesting to go through and look through, and when you have a little more time to do that. All right. So this next section, I'm gonna read verses 30 through 37, and we'll pause there. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe, when she had received the spies with peace. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak, and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. So, just another little fun thing you can do if you want. I looked, whenever there are these lists, and especially in this case, there's kind of two lists. There's a list of people and a list of things that we've seen in the Old Testament that are proofs of people's faith. What I did was I wrote out each of these people and I tried to kind of tie them to what are the things in the list that applied to the people. I don't know that every single one applied to one, and I think some of them probably applied to more than one, but it was just kind of something fun that I did and kind of looked at how do these two lists relate, because they were given one after the other. That's not by accident. The author had them in mind when he wrote each list, the list of people and then the list of things that happened. So if you want to do that, you can do that. But this is another section that you can go through and say, okay, was this something that they did? Was this a substance of their faith? Or was this an evidence of their faith? This was something that proved to them that their faith had meaning, that it was something to be relied upon. Any questions on like any of the things that are mentioned in there, or any thoughts about them?
They didn't have an easy time of it back then.
Nope. No. it is just a personal pet peeve maybe, but I think we as a culture have been really desensitized to like what it actually means to be the word just gave me.
Professor of the faith, yeah.
Yeah. And so sometimes we kind of equate things that are happening today to like being crucified as a Christian. And I just think it's not necessarily appropriate to compare the two.
Yeah.
We
Not
don't
that-
understand
Yeah,
persecution.
close.
Right. Persecution. It's like there's a word and I'm forgetting it. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's not to say that we don't go through bad things, and it's not to say that when you do go through something bad, you should belittle that or say that it's not as big a deal, because that's not true. But it's just societally, like calling some of the things we've been through persecution to that same level is not necessarily accurate, maybe not appropriate. I don't know. Who am I to say? I'm just a person. Anyways,
I don't know.
yeah. Any other thoughts before we hit this last section? Okay. Grandma, if you would like to read verses 38 through 40.
The end, okay. And all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. So when they're saying they didn't receive the promise, they didn't see the Savior. I
Mhm.
believe that's what they're talking about. They didn't see Christ coming.
And actually, I'm going to step back one more verse. We missed verse 38 there. It says, of whom the
Oh,
world...
did I miss a verse?
Yeah, it's okay. Of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, in dens and caves of the earth. And that ties back to what we were talking about, that other previous section, where he's talking about they had the option to pledge allegiance to a country here. Sorry, anyways. They had the option to put their eggs in that basket, that I belong to this nation, this is my home. And instead they chose to rely on the promise of this heavenly country. And then here he's saying the world wasn't even worthy of them. See all of these things that they did, and the world wasn't worthy of them, to the point that they were living like, I want to say vagabonds, and I'm not sure if that's the right word, but they were living like strangers that didn't belong here.
Mhm.
Because they didn't. They were better than what the world had to offer. Which goes into, like Grandma was saying, all of these having obtained a good testimony, meaning God approved of what they did very vocally. We know that he was pleased with what they did. And we know from other authors of scripture that people saw the value in what they did. Even though they did all of these things and their faith looked humongous, they still did not receive the promise until we did. And remembering that this letter is written to Hebrew Christians who are struggling with their faith, this is a boost of confidence to your faith, to understand that these, for lack of a better word, heroes that you have grown up hearing about, and you know all of these amazing, incredible things that they did and how their faith moved mountains and accomplished all these big things. But to understand that even though they did all of those things, they still did not earn salvation, were not given salvation until the time was appropriate for everybody, meaning me. They didn't get it before me. They didn't get it like apart from me. We all got it at the same time. And my faith, even though it doesn't look like Abraham's faith or fill in the blank of all these other people that have been mentioned, my faith is giving me the same reward that they're getting. They're not heroes. I mean, they're just people, and they lived just like we lived, and they struggled just like we struggled. They weren't any better than we were because they had to wait on the exact same salvation that I did. So it's an encouragement to say, you know, these people that you grew up hearing about, they did incredible things, and yet they're no better than you. They have the exact same resolution to that faith that you have, which personally I find pretty incredible. It's like, whoa. I had a
Yeah.
moment
Yeah.
in college where I realized, like, this is not Hercules, you know, this is not some like fable of some imperfect but enjoyable hero who wins the day and they're like better than everybody else. This is just a person who had real struggles and lived day-to-day life, probably similar to me. They had to go to work, they had to eat food, they had to do all of these things that I do. And we get kind of caught up in the big things without understanding. It's just a part of their life.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Exactly.
And it really, really brings to mind where it says, you know, that he loved the whole world. It's like, you know, that for God so loved the world that they should all be saved. So, and it says that they should not be made perfect apart from us. So he was including all of us, the whole world,
Yeah.
that in existence and that to be.
Right. Exactly. The things we can see and the things we can't see.
Right.
Definitely.
You made it through the whole chapter.
I did. It was a little bit longer, I think, than I anticipated, but not too bad.
Yeah.
I know we kind of talk about it a lot. I know, like, me and Grant personally, I think, have mentioned it several times over the, like, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years that we've been in ministry, if you want to call it that. I think everybody should be ministering in some form or fashion. But we talk a lot about faith and how there's like this idea of what faith is, and then there's like the reality of what faith is. And I think sometimes we look at that verse 11, verse 1 of chapter 11, and we're kind of like, look, this is what faith is. And I don't know that we always actually really, what does that mean? You know, I remember hearing that in like youth events in high school, and I was like, oh yeah, that's what faith is. And it was like, I have no idea what that means. Okay. And so it gave kind of light to me of like, what does it mean in my life to have faith? It means my faith has to have substance. It has to do something in my life. And it's also going to prove to me why I believe, why I have the hope that I have. And so it's been helpful for me to kind of like actually look at, okay, let's break it down. I know a sentence is pretty short, but it's still not short enough in this example. Let's break it down a little bit smaller. And what does it actually mean? So, yeah.
And it's also like, it's when, you know, when it says faith without works is nothing. And this is a good example where you can go back to see that the works aren't labors, so to speak. You know, I always think like, oh, work. Okay, what work? What work would I have to do to prove my faith? Well, it's just obedience. It's not just, I shouldn't say just, but it's like you said, it's evidence of your obedience to what God has promised.
Yeah, and there are some like schools of thought that will kind of combat the idea of faith without works is dead, and then also by grace through faith. And so it's like there's like two schools of thought, which there shouldn't be. They're both in the Bible, so they're both applicable. And how do we put the two together? But there are people who kind of come at the angle from one way or the other. And this is actually a good chapter to point to and say, okay, so in the example of Abraham, he left his home at God's calling. Okay, you can call that a faith, or you can call that a work, but at the same time, did leaving actually accomplish anything? Like, did it give him his son? Did it give him the promise that God told him he would have? No, but it is a work that he did. It was a proof of his faith because he did it, and God did bless him because of it. So it's kind of the marrying of the works you have to do, but also it's by grace. The blessings that Abraham got because he was faithful are not because he did what he did. They were because God was blessing him for obedience. Does that make
For his
sense?
obedience.
Yeah.
It was pointed out to me at some point, and I've always found it very interesting, that if you look at all of these examples, by faith Abel offered, by faith Enoch was translated, by faith Noah built, by faith Abraham obeyed. All of those are action verbs.
Mm-hmm.
By faith there was an action.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it kind of goes along with the faith without works.
Mm-hmm.
Because of their faith, they did something. They
Yeah.
did what God told them to do. So yes, God's grace blessed them because they were faithfully obedient,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
And in the examples where, well, yeah, in the case where the faith was the example of things not seen, that's more like the idea of grace by faith, because they couldn't have done that. There's no way that Enoch could have just walked off and just stopped existing.
Translated himself.
Yeah, he couldn't have done that. It happened to him. It was an act of grace that God had on him because of his faith. And so, yeah, it's just definitely like, I don't know that I would have thought to come to this chapter if somebody was trying to like compare the two schools of thought, but it's a good place to look because it is like both. You can't have one without the other. And
Right.
It's an error of thought. We think, well, this says one thing and it seems to counteract what this other thing says. And so which one is right? And well, they're both right. And what does that mean? It's not always as easy as like, okay, book, chapter, verse. Well, yes, but there's a whole other like 65 books with a lot of other verses that all play together. So
Right.
yeah, it's very important. So, any other last questions or thoughts or anything?
I don't think so.
Awesome. Good.
Okay.
All right. Well, then next week, I need to put more reminders on my phone, I guess, because I keep forgetting. But next week, we should be able to meet around 7, hopefully at 7 next time. All right.
So there's only 2 more chapters left. So this will be just in time for your move. So we can't miss anymore.
I was like, I don't really want to put off till next week, but I'm just not ready. So I needed that extra 30 minutes to kind of go over
Yeah.
everything again. But I was like, okay. So yeah, I will not forget next week. I promise. I'm gonna put like 5 reminders on my phone. We're not gonna forget again.